Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. It's been over a month now since the heinous torture and murder of Robert Brooks occurred. No arrests have been made, no charges filed against anyone, nothing has happened since. And this in a Democrat state. And with no less than Letitia James as Attorney General, she was saying that she wasn't going to allow justice to be delayed or denied in this case. And then here we are a month later with nothing having happened, so that's what you get. You see, they're trying to see if this issue is going to go away. They're digging in their heels on this one. Now, they've tried to throw the public some crumbs by having that wrinkled-up racist Kathy Hochul make a nothing burger statement. And all they've done is suspend a few of the killers and their accomplices without pay. Kathy Hochul herself decided that she was going to visit the scene of the crime, and you can tell she's feeling the heat. And the reason for that is she's got delusions of running for higher office. And after the public backlash she received for endorsing the murder of Jordan Neely, and also how she saw Kamala Harris's shameful record of backing the thugs in blue tank not one but two of her presidential attempts, well, I guess that's why Kathy Hochul's suddenly acting like the law should apply to the criminals with badges and not just the ones without. She correctly pointed out that Letitia James could have already hit the murderers with charges while making preparations to add other charges later on. There's a slew of charges that they could have already put on these killers. And the governor's right about that. Prosecutors do it this way all the time. Except, of course, this isn't what they want to do. This is about putting on some political theater to pacify the outraged public. They're stalling for time. Now, the last that we heard anything from the so-called authorities regarding this murder was nearly 2 weeks ago, and at that time, Letitia James had announced that she was recusing herself from this case. She was taking herself away from prosecuting this case, and this is the woman who was claiming from the very beginning of the public scandal on this that justice wasn't going to be delayed or denied, and she was talking about how she was so dedicated to seeing this thing through, and now she's saying, "Oh, excuse me, I gotta go." And what's the reason for this? She announced that her office is defending at least 4 of the criminals who have been implicated in the murder of Mr. Brooks. That's right, defending at least 4 of the individuals implicated in this murder. Now, she doesn't name who it is that she's defending, but remember, the feds were the only ones who were making a half-hearted effort to investigate these criminals prior to the murder of Mr. Brooks. And they already had cases that they were supposed to be putting together, though nothing came of that. What do you expect from the Biden White House? So this is all a concerted effort by state and federal authorities to go through the motions. There's a program at work here is what I'm trying to say. Now, at last report, after Letitia James recused herself, she passed this political hot potato over to what they're calling a special prosecutor, quote unquote. And in this case, it's Onondaga County District Attorney William Fitzpatrick. That's who apparently is supposed to be the special prosecutor in this case. In other words, just the DA. Now, New York's penal code has a lot of parameters for what qualifies as first-degree murder. I noticed that a disproportionate number of these scenarios involve someone with a badge being killed. So basically, they try to make this big deal about, well, anybody with a badge is receiving protection under law. If something happens to them, it's first-degree murder. Yeah, they stubbed their toe. That's first-degree murder, buddy. This is the epitome of injustice. For every one law that defines killing someone with a badge as first-degree murder, then of a necessity there must be 3 laws that qualify a cop or anyone with a badge who kills somebody as being first-degree murder. You got to make it where the police understand you go ahead and decide that you're going to misuse your little old authority and you're going to get hit with first-degree everything. That would be justice, but we don't live under justice, do we? Now, one of the definitions of first-degree murder in New York is the defendant acted in an especially cruel and wanton manner pursuant to a course of conduct intended to inflict and inflicting torture upon the victim prior to the victim's death. As used in this subparagraph, torture means the intentional and depraved infliction of extreme physical pain. Depraved means the defendant relished the infliction of extreme physical pain upon the victim, evidencing debasement or perversion, or that the defendant evidenced a sense of pleasure in the infliction of extreme physical pain. That is word for word what happened to Robert Brooks. His death was undeniably first-degree murder. And not only was he killed, he was tortured to death. And his murderers took sick glee in every second of it. That's what they wanted to do. And more than that, though, these were not just 4 white men who killed him. There were 4 white men with badges. And for the so-called authorities, that means they have double the incentive to not see any sort of prosecution go forward. That's the reason why they're stalling for time, not making any statements and not doing anything. All of this is supposed to be making the public wait and wait, and what they think is going to happen is they'll say, well, we've decided that we can't really justify any higher charges than third-degree misdemeanor homicide or whatever at most. Or at the very least say, well, they had badges, so, qualified immunity. They were carrying out their duties, don't you know? I told you about how the white media was setting up the idea of this is a use of force issue. Oh, well, see, they were justified. They just went a little bit too far, you see. And that being the case, well, they were carrying out their duties. They're authorized to use force, don't you know? That's what all of this foot dragging and stalling for time is about. The idea is they're thinking to themselves that the public is going to be relieved just to see them do something. To them, they're trying to defuse the issue, and this is how they think they're going to do it. This slow walking of the investigation isn't because they don't have the evidence. They got a ton of evidence. They got the murder on video. They're just trying to figure out, how do we bury this? How do we get rid of this one? Because you see, you begin punishing the enforcers of white supremacy, and there's no enforcement mechanism for white power's so-called legislation. How do you force people to live under an unjust system? You use violence to do it. But if you start making it where the perpetrators of that violence can't carry out their criminality, well, then nobody's going to willingly go along with a system of injustice. I've said it countless times, these racist DAs and corrupt judges have long had an unspoken but fiercely enforced policy that when police kill a black person, particularly if it's a white cop that does it, then they are not to be sentenced to anything more than 5 years in prison. Now, there is no law on the books that imposes a 5-year limitation on punishing police, but this is what these prosecutors and judges have agreed upon amongst themselves. And we know that this is a deliberate system that's at work by how consistently it happens, be it in Texas, California, New York, or wherever. Red states, blue states, purple states, all of them upholding white power. What they're worried about is that the same energy that broke loose in 2020 may be on the verge of doing so again. Only this time it won't be in Minnesota. It'll be in New York. And yes, there's been suspensions of some of these criminals, but this should also include Letitia James as well, because she's known about this doggone mess for years and hasn't done anything about it. At some point, she's supposed to be held accountable for this. I detailed for you how at least 3 of the murders of Robert Brooks had already been under federal investigation for beatings that they carried out in 2020 and 2022, which, by the way, both of those incidents were after Letitia James was already Attorney General of New York. So she knew all about this mess. It happened on her watch, and she did nothing about it. Letitia James is a bold protector and proponent of these thugs with badges being allowed to get away with murder. After all, what do you expect from somebody who is called the state's top cop? As Attorney General, she loves hearing that. I'm the state's top cop. Yeah, a dirty cop. This woman ran on an alleged platform of police accountability because she was running for office in the middle of the BLM protests. But we see what her idea of keeping the thugs with badges in check is. Her office is literally acting as defense counsel for these criminals. She's literally defending these animals. I've been telling you for years now that the enemy has been trying to tiptoe its way back to the old normal. That is what things were before the uprisings of 2020. Well, at this point, they're not tiptoeing anymore, and now it's a full-fledged stride. And Letitia James is the main one leading this perverted parade. Just like Kamala Harris before her, she's prioritized supporting the thugs in blue over any black person. As far as she's concerned, she's going to make it to higher office over black people's dead bodies. So it doesn't matter if it's Kamala Harris, or if it's Daniel Cameron, or Letitia James, or Alvin Bragg. They all operate out of the exact same playbook. They know exactly what the rules of racism are, and they play it to a T. Their job is to make sure the white power is assured that the racial pyramid scheme is going to remain in order, and that the enforcement of it by using unrestricted and unpunished killings of black people will also remain supported. That she's going to make sure that all these killings of black people never go anywhere. But understand something. This woman is eventually going to be having the nerve to demand loyalty from us, and she's going to have a phalanx of bootlicks out there backing her up on that. Before it's all over, she'll be doing some half-brained press conference or some other form of PR stunt. And she'll make sure that she has whoever her bootlicking cheerleaders are behind her, and they'll be standing there behind her like so many extras in a pathetic infomercial. But you can bet that was going to be coming next. That's what they always do. Now, as the black grassroots, what we have to do is to make sure two things happen. One, we're going to have to start advocating heavy for that anti-black hate crime law. But more importantly than that, Letitia James, for the stunts that she pulled, making sure she would stick up for everybody except for us, she had a hotline and all the rest of it, appeals to the public for help during the so-called Stop Asian Hate movement, which, by the way, happened at the same time that black people were in 2020 and 2021 the majority of hate crimes victims. But Letitia James, who I hear is black, she didn't have anything to say about that. Same way that Officer Eric Adams of the NYPD wasn't too terribly bothered by all the killings of black people. He immediately reverted to, what about black-on-black crime? And you see how the white leadership of the DNC repaid him. They're putting charges on his behind. Now, Letitia James, I'll bet it doesn't take much imagination to figure out that she's no doubt got some kind of form of dirt under her fingernails. We've seen this with Fannie Willis. We've also seen it with Carolyn Mosby. So Letitia James, as stupid and incompetent as she is and crooked as she is, yeah, I'm willing to bet that she's got some stuff going on that she would not want anyone to know about. That's because people who are corrupt when it comes to carrying out their duties in office means there's a ton of corruption outside of the office, just a matter of time for people to find it. And white power doesn't put these bootlicks in any sort of position without having something heavy to hold over their heads. When the time comes that they got themselves some Negro who suddenly decides to grow a spine, well, they know exactly how they're going to remove him. Though in most cases, these guys are going no matter what because white power has no permanent plans for them. But the murder of Robert Brooks is yet another in an endless string of data points about why it is that we are supposed to have an anti-black hate crime law in this country. But it also illustrates for us that we're going to be facing opposition not just from the Republicans, but also the Democrats as well. Letitia James deserves to be excoriated and hated by the black community every bit as much as Kamala Harris, because she's doing the exact same kind of things. Kamala Harris also, as I detail for you on this channel in the archives here, when I did my videos reposting what I had said about Kamala Harris nearly a decade ago, that woman was protecting the thugs in blue when she was the DA back in San Francisco. She adamantly refused to cooperate with the public defender's office and hand over the service records of these crooked, dirty cops, which, by the way, she had no legal standing not to do it. She just said, I'm not going to do it. And when asked why, she said, well, it's a matter of privacy. Now, we're talking about their service record, which is what they do when they're on the job. Police do not have any expectation of privacy when it comes to their public duties, except that's exactly the kind of argument that Kamala Harris tried to put together. And that's what she was doing, and Letitia James operates out of the exact same playbook, and I'll bet she's thinking to herself, well, now that Kamala Harris is no longer going to be an obstacle, assuming that Kathy Hochul doesn't find herself some rich white backers first, maybe it's time for me to mount a presidential campaign. And she'll be sitting here talking about how she's tough on crime, and she'll sit there and say, I was investigating Donald Trump. Did you bring any charges? I was investigating. I was looking his direction. And of course, she's going to want to make sure that just like Kamala Harris, she has her support from the Fraternal Order of Police or the Corrections Officers Union or whatever lined up. They always want to make sure that they're on the good side of the thugs in blue for a number of reasons. It's not just union votes. It's also donations as well. They want to make sure they got all that lined up. But we need to make sure that we remember the murder of Robert Brooks. The same way that for 4 years I made sure that you remembered all of Joe Biden's broken promises that he made on the campaign trail, so that you would be reminded over and over again, hey, before Joe Biden starts telling you all of this hocus pocus pie in the sky stuff about what he'll do if he gets reelected, ask him, why haven't you done any of the stuff that you promised to do when you got elected? This is where Letitia James is going with this, and the Democrats too. The murder of Robert Brooks should have been acted upon immediately. There should have been charges that day. But more importantly than that, the murder of Robert Brooks actually shouldn't have happened at all. And if we lived under a system of justice, and if these so-called authorities were not more dedicated to racial immunity from law than they were to actually upholding the law, then the criminals who murdered him would have already been in jail themselves. They would never have had the opportunity to kill Robert Brooks because they would already be in cages where they belong. And that's ultimately what the goal must be. But because of her corruption and malfeasance, when and if the murderers of Robert Brooks get put behind bars, Letitia James ought to have a cage right beside them. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Cornell Sly, Alexa Villard, James Porter, Workhorse Enterprise, and Gregory Franklin. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.